Hello all, and welcome to a very special live edition of Real Talk with Canuck. Joining me in this special edition is Tino from Lost Battlefields and Stone Loki from Mornings of Mischief every morning at 8 o'clock. If you ain't watching, you are missing out. How are we doing this morning, or this afternoon? Wow, I'm fucking behind the times. How are we doing this afternoon, gentlemen?
Well, it's 81 degrees. I'm sitting by the beach, and I can't complain.
Oh, well, it's 12 degrees here and cloudy.
Well, it's a personal lifestyle choice you've made up in Canada. I understand.
I did not make a choice. I was born here. There's no choice involved. I was born here, damn it. Loki, how are we doing this afternoon?
I'm the one who's supposed to say good morning all the time.
Yeah. You're the morning guy. I'm never the morning guy. I tried that shit when I first started this channel, and that lasted about 2 weeks, and I went, oh no, alarm clock bad.
That's right.
So today we're going to discuss a few things quickly. Hello, Chris Persia. Hello, Alaska Jeff. So we're going to talk. This is kind of old news now. But originally, I wasn't going to do a video on this. I wasn't going to do a video. I wasn't going to do a live stream. I was going to leave it alone. Then I started seeing some of the mindless reactions to it. And so the topic today, brace for it, YouTube. I think I can mention it now. We've been live for 2 minutes. We are going to talk about the standing ovation given in the House of Commons here in Canada a couple of weeks ago. Like I said, it's old news. It's not, didn't just happen, but people have had time to process. And one of the things that I noticed with the people's reactions to what happened was it was a lot of blah 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 and no context. There's no substance. There was no meat on the bone. So I thought, fuck it, I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to do it right. So I brought in Loki from the United States. I brought in Tino from the United States, and then I got myself and my fellow Canadian is supposed to be here, but he's been delayed at work, so he's going to join us when he can. But I brought Tino in to give a historical background because that's kind of his shtick, and I brought Loki in because I know he's always got really good insights, and we share a few views here and there. So what I wanted to do with this to start off with before we got into the main chat was I wanted Tino to give us some background, because we hear the word Yahtzee, and I'll say Yahtzee because we're on YouTube. Everybody else, if you can't figure it out, change the Y to an N and you're good.
Are you saying we can't say the N word on YouTube?
Yeah. Just change the Y to an N and you're good. But anyway, so basically what I wanted to do is people heard that word and went all crazy, insane. And it's like, okay, hold on, chill, relax. Yes. And now I'm going to state this right off the top. Do I think it was a good idea what happened in the House of Commons? Absolutely not. It should have been vetted. It should not have happened. And the very fact that this was allowed to happen without vetting is freaking insane and mind-blowing. So by no stretch of the imagination, no matter what's said, I do not agree with the decision to do it. do not think it was the right thing to do. I don't think it was an acceptable thing to do. However, with that said, I think it is very important that we add the context. And by context, I mean, okay, he was in the SS, Waffen SS unit, such and such. Great. Well, what did that unit do? And no one has really talked about that. All they have stuck with is, he's SS. Terrible. Okay. Did he shine tires for the war? So I think it's important before we start this conversation that I bring it into over to Tino, and Tino has graciously taken time away from looking at pretty ladies in the gym to come and
it's a real thing here in California. It's all we got. It really is all we got.
Sorely missing from this conversation. So, Tino, without further ado, I'll let you kind of take it away. And what did the unit actually do in World War II?
Well, there's a whole lot of things that are wrong with the general conversation, but it's the same conversation we've heard ever since World War II, especially when it comes to the SS. And I'm going to have to use the N word. I seem to remember being able to get away with it on my channel. But as a military historian, one thing that irks me is when you blanket a group of people as this or that. And when you talk about the SS, then all of a sudden, well, they're all Nazis. Well, all the Germans, they're all Nazis. So anybody who basically fought in German uniform or allied, well, they're all Nazis, according to the very, very easy way of looking at things, where this is actually very far from the case. If you want to boil down to details, and I think we should have a little bit of details about this regiment, but also about the conversation we have when it comes to the SS and the Waffen-SS, because that's not the same organization. First of all, only 2% of the German population were members of the National Socialist Party. So if you actually want to refer to who was an actual Nazi, which is not a term the Germans even used, then you can look at who's a member of the National Socialist Party, which is only 2%, which is very far from the fighting front. Now, then you have Himmler's SS, which started as a bodyguard for Hitler. That grew. Then they had, and the SS, the Allgemeine SS, they were the ones. They started by running Dachau, the concentration camp. They were in charge of the camp system and the forced laborers. Then you had the military version, the Waffen-SS. Now, the Waffen-SS was declared a legal organization in 1947 at the Nuremberg trials. However, because the two are different, this was recanted in 1955. So being a member of the Waffen-SS does not make you a war criminal. Whatever acts you may have participated in or your unit may have participated in may make you a war criminal. And that's how, granted, the Russians just shot anybody who was in the SS out of hand. The Americans, to a large extent, everybody from Patton's army to others, would shoot SS men out of hand. Few prisoners were taken here and there, lots of retaliation. Everybody committed war crimes, only the Germans were persecuted. The German SS men were actually hung post-war for things that the Russians did. So it gets very murky when you dive into it. They fought, and they fought very, very hard. There was about 1 million SS men. The only organization that could take foreign volunteers. But you have to remember, in the context of the Second World War, we always look at Hitler being the main aggressor at the start of the war. He jumped off in different directions, invaded countries, fine. But you also had the Russians, who helped Hitler invade Poland. The Russians and the Germans, they teamed up starting the war by invading Poland. And Stalin was smart enough to wait until Hitler take the blame. A large part of the Europeans, the European population in general, were very much anti-communist, anti-Bolshevik. Churchill was very much afraid of Stalin and his communists. The whole idea of Stalin's idea of communism was to take over countries, and a lot of people volunteered to the SS. You couldn't volunteer to join the German army, but you could volunteer to join the SS. and go fight against the communists. A lot of people did. The Dutch, the Danes, Germans, Germans obviously the Austrians, and then you had the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians gets a little more complicated because after the after the First World War, then you had Ukraine was given Galicia, which was very heavily populated by Poles. You had Ukrainian nationalists, and this started before World War I as well. There were a lot of fighting going on between the Poles and the Ukrainians. On one hand, a lot of nationalists, and you've all heard Bandera's name thrown around. I always said one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. It gets murky. And you have, on the other hand of that, you have the Russian occupation of the rest of Ukraine. But they also fought. The Poles fought the Russians and beat them and defeated them in 1920 and kicked out, actually an army led by Stalin, kicked them out. The Poles were now safe within their borders. Then you had Ukraine was occupied by the Russians after they had their fighting. So the Ukrainians had an active war against the Russians. When you then get to, and you have to bring in the mass starvation of depending on numbers, a third or a fourth of the Ukrainian population by Stalin's men, by Stalin, delivered to the point where the forced collectivization of farms starved a very large part of the Ukrainians to death. And it is one thing that Ukrainians today still have not gotten over. So you can say you're now entering into a Second World War scenario where the Ukrainians' memory of the Russians is oppression and starvation and secret police and murders and all the wonderful things that came with Stalin's communism. So in 1943, when the war is starting to turn on Germany, Himmler and others were starting to look at expanding SS divisions by taking foreign volunteers. It was suggested by a gentleman named Otto Wache, who was the Gauleiter of Ukraine and of the area of Galicia, that he set up a volunteer SS division. Now, Bandera was not entirely happy with this. And if you look at the history between Bandera and Poland, you're going to find very bad blood, because Bandera's men killed a lot of Polish people, civilians, eradicated villages, did a lot of very not nice things. And that is something that is still in the Polish mindset. It gets very complicated when you get to Eastern Europe, because at one point in time, everyone have committed horrible atrocities to everyone else. So that they're still talking today is interesting. Anyway, Bandera was opposed to the 14, as it became known as the 4th Volunteer Division, the SS Galicia. Even the name was a little bit controversy, but the Galicia division they had support of the Ukrainian Church, and both churches, and in fact, the Greek Catholic Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is a big deal, and that's something you need to remember. This was seen as a way for Ukrainians to join the fight against the Bolsheviks. Now, all SS units, like all German army units, they swore allegiance to Hitler. And at the SS unit, they were generally trained harder. They were also, of course, politically indoctrinated to a larger extent. They were generally not free field priests or pastors in the SS units. However, the Ukrainian Central Committee, which was a non-political social welfare organization, if ever there was one, headed by a gentleman named Vladimir, and I can't pronounce his last name without offending someone in Ukraine. They were in support of this formation of this. Himmler got behind the idea. The Ukrainian National Democratic Alliance got behind it. Bandera tried to take charge of it. That didn't happen. He was the ultra-nationalist. There's 2 fractions in Ukraine at the time. It gets very complicated. You need a scorecard here. But there was 3 stipulations for the Galicia for them to actually accept becoming an SS unit. One is they would exclusively be used to fight the Bolsheviks, i.e. the communists. That was part of it. Second, in their oath to Hitler that they would all swear, it would also to be incorporated that they were only to fight Bolsheviks. So they would never fight the British, the Americans, the Canadians, anyone else. This was their way, the Ukrainians' way, they saw this as a path to greater independence after the war had been won by Germany and allies. That was their way they looked at it. We put something in, we fight the Russians with the Germans, and maybe we'll get to keep our own country afterwards. The third is interesting. Chaplains was to be allowed to be integrated in this unit. Greek Catholics, and this was also a way for the Ukrainians to have their own Ukrainian nationalists indoctrinate their troops rather than having the German National Socialists do it. So in many ways, we would say, yes, it was an SS unit, but they were not really Nazis, if it doesn't really work. They were Ukrainian nationalists. You could certainly accuse them of that if you wish. And there was 53,000 men that served in the regiment towards the end. So what did they do? They did a lot of anti-partisan actions, which is very, very messy and very, very violent and very, very dirty, where everybody plays dirty and everyone kills everyone. Russians and had left partisans in the forest, and we all seen, I'm sure, the movies, where they'll burn down villages for people helping the Germans, and the Germans would then burn down other villages for helping the partisans. It's very nasty, and that's one of the things they did, and they hunted down those in the forests that were lending sabotage against the Germans. They did it so well, in fact, that Model, he actually praised them, which takes a bit. They fought real battles. They didn't hide behind police actions or so. The battle at Brody, they lost where they were encircled and had to fight their way out. It was a full frontal war against Russians. They lost 7,800 men out of 11,000 in that one battle. And in total, the Corps lost 21,766 men. But they fought. They fought real battles, real stand-up wars. And then towards the end of the war, they did more anti-partisan actions around the Slovenian and Austrian border. And eventually they surrendered to the British and the Americans and were interned in Italy. And we'll get to that in a minute because that's kind of important. They were interned in Rimini, Italy, all of the Ukrainian soldiers. This area in Italy was controlled by the Second Polish Corps. So now the Poles had control over these Ukrainians. And mind you, the ones who are pointing to war crimes are the Polish, because the war crimes the 14th is supposed to have done or accused of having done, and probably did, they did against several villages in Poland. And that's what the rub is. So now you have an organization that was deemed to be criminal in 45, 46, 47 officially by the Nuremberg trials. The 14th weren't specified, they weren't named in the Nuremberg trials, but all of SS, Waffen-SS men were. Eventually they would separate SS and Waffen-SS, and Waffen-SS were accepted as a fighting force, and in that way exonerated for blanket war crimes. SS men were still tried and executed or put in prison for what they had done, what their units had, their commanders had done, individual soldiers had done, and so on and so forth. But so you had all these Ukrainians that were now sitting in Italy, and as we know, a lot of people who are Eastern Europeans who fought in German on the German side were sent back by the Allies to the Russians, and there were some very horrible scenes of that, with the Cossacks and their families were evicted back to the Russians, where they were all killed and murdered, and the Allies did it. They had to beat them with sticks. It was very, very ugly what the British did. The Ukrainians did a deal with the Polish, where their commander requested they not be extradited to the Soviet Union. And even though the Russians were pressuring to get them back, their commander, Vladislav Anders, he actually kept his soldiers together. He kept the 14th together, those who were still alive. And there was also some citizens of the Second Republic of Poland. It gets very complicated. There are some Poles amongst them as well. They also didn't want to go back to Soviet-occupied Poland. So that, with Anders, and the Vatican intervened and put pressure on as well, making sure they weren't deported back to USSR. and several bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church also intervened. A lot of religiousness, and there's still a religious neighborhood. Basically, they were all deemed as Pope Pius. He described them as good Catholics, fervent anti-communists, where the anti-communism was far more important, especially at this point where the Cold War was right around the corner. So the British authorities changed their status for the division from prisoners of war to surrendered enemy personnel people. And none of the individuals of the Ukrainians, none of the listed men, have been prosecuted for any war crimes at any point. Never. And they were all then, at this point, history, they were then released to send to, that's why you have them in Canada and England. A lot of them were then expatriated to Canada. Was a lot of them moved to Canada, a lot of them moved to England. Everything was above board, everything was on paper. There was no paperclip hiding in that sense. So what did they do? What they did do, or what eyewitnesses have said they had done, they were at one point in time attached to the Dirlewanger Brigade, which was a German SS penal brigade of poachers and criminals. And Otto Dirlewanger was not a nice person. It was kind of a band of misfits. Probably movies have been made of type like that. They were in part of, again, anti-partisan, where they would just wipe out anybody suspected. They were hard drinkers. They would steal. They were criminals. They were criminals with a whole lot of weapons, and they were in that brigade, in that unit, to redeem themselves. They were attached to the 14th, or the 14th were attached to them. Also for the Warsaw Uprising, they were involved in that. But there were two Polish villages specifically that were where they were sent in 44 and destroyed the village of Huta, again with the whole names, Hutapienka. Yes, I'm reading it because I wouldn't even remember it, where it was claimed that 500 civilians were murdered by several SS police regiments from the 4th to the 8th, which included members of the Galicia. Police regiments had joined the Galicia in 44. So there's the 4th and 5th Police Regiment that participated in actions in this village. Now, was this gentleman that they brought up to applaud, was he a member of those units attached to that? I have actually not been able to quite figure out where he belongs. That's one thing. You have Polish eyewitnesses stated that soldiers of the Ukrainian nationalist paramilitary units under Volodymyr Chemerinsky's command, which included some from the 14th, stole property from the building, and they shelled the village and killed civilians. The Ukrainian National Academy of Science, this is before all this blew up. This is not a new thing. This is not a new situation. This has been investigated for a long time. Did they kill civilians? And they said it is probable that they participated in killing civilians within this village. Although they questioned the validity of some of the eyewitness reports, and eyewitness reports post-fact during the Second World War, there's a lot of those that can be very problematic. Still, nothing have ever come to trial. Nothing been tried. No one's ever been convicted of this. You also had a village of Pidienka, where there was a monastery, where it was said that the SS Galicia, a subunit from the SS Galicia, participated in execution of Polish civilians. That is the two events that they are being accused of having done the 14th, other than fighting and killing Russians on the front, which apparently everyone's fine with these days. Dieter Pohl, a Holocaust historian, have cited, and I quote, "There is a high probability that in February 44 at Brody, men from the 14th SS assisted in rounding up Jewish people." So you have a whole lot of probable, may have been, could have done, probably there. it gets complicated. But now we talk about this particular gentleman that they brought up and bringing him up for remember, in Ukraine, there was a march to the 14th. There's an annual march to celebrate those who fought, because in Ukraine, they were seen as having fought against the Russians. That's how they're remembered. There's memorial stones in Canada, in America, and Poland. In Ukraine, to memorialize this regiment. So it's not that these people have been hiding. They didn't run out of a concentration camp, change their names, and hid somewhere. They've been out there the whole time. And this gentleman that they applauded, there's been no secret about who he was at all. He had, for the past 10, 15 years, he is a member of the, every military organization in history have a soldiers union or memorial organization, someone keeping their members together. And there were somewhere between 9,000 and 17,000 members of the 14th Militia that survived the war and emigrated away from the East into England and Canada, and they formed soldiers organizations, and he was a member of one of them and blogged and wrote about it. So who he was, and as part of the 14th, was never a secret to anyone. Anyone in Canada could look up who they were. And in Canada, of all places, as you know, there's always been a bit of a riff against anybody who, historians and others, who talks about the Second World War in an open, non-traditional way, i.e. raising questions or suggesting this. You have a very active Jewish community, and there's been several times they vandalized the memorial stones to the 14th. There's a cemetery, of course, several of them in Canada, where these members that they died of have been buried. So, for anyone in Canadian politics to wonder how this could have happened or who this gentleman was is somewhat ridiculous, because he's always been out there. He's outspoken. He's not a secret. He did what he did. He's proud of what he did, as in fighting the Canadians. Fighting the Canadians. Sorry, as in fighting the Russians, which is something everybody seems to get behind right now. And a little bit of why you see a lot of Ukrainian frontline soldiers will bring up rune tabs and different things like that. And I just got back from Ukraine as a historian, looking at a meeting with people out there. And a lot of times it is more the symbols of people who has fought against the Russians before, that it is an identification or self-identification as a National Socialist. Because National Socialism is very endemic to Germany at the time. And it has racial policies, border policies. It's kind of hard to translate to other countries, especially to Slavic people, theoretically. So it's interesting. You have a lot of Russians that are wearing SS patches and so on. So it's not that these people are identifying today, as I see it, as Nazis or neo-Nazis in that sense. They sort of revised and revamped the usage of memorabilia of nationalism from Germany. They're borrowing and then they're making it their own. And now you have Russian nationalists wearing SS runes, Ukrainian nationalists wearing SS runes, and all sorts of others. So it gets really murky. But I think it's important that we can't just blanket condemn people for what they may or may not have done, although we really are very good at that. But I think to begin with, we have to separate the fact that no member of the SS Galician, okay, they had officers, there was Ukrainian officers, highly decorated, German and Austrian officers. If any of them were member of the National Socialist Party, possibly, but I guarantee you that practically all of its actual members were not. And they probably wouldn't have been let in either due to their ethnic background, although Himmler did see them as Aryan in his strange and interesting vision. But to blanket them because they carry the name of the SS, or being Waffen-SS, being fighting soldiers who were in their charter fighting for a post-war free Ukraine free of the Soviets. That's how they saw it. But the war crimes that was committed, like I said, no one has ever been tried. No, there's never been any trial. No one's been convicted. So was it a good idea? Probably not from a political point of view. It's not like politicians don't take snide shots at each other. And here you have such a brilliant prime minister and politicians up there. They're the brightest stars in the heavens above. To do something like that would give the other side, the opposition in Canada, so much ammunition. I'm sorry. For the rest of us, it's a little delightful. I did a little smiling and go like, yeah, okay, that was a really stupid thing to do. But it was a very, very predictable, stupid thing to do. And actually, I don't know. I'm just an American looking in now, and I didn't know that Canadians had such a problem. I thought they hated people who fought communists, but that might just be me.
All right. So now we've got some of the context. I'm going to let Loki give his 2 cents, as it were, and then I'm going to chime in. So, Loki, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And Tina, absolutely brilliant. The whole reason why I agreed to be here today is to talk about basically blanket blaming an entire group of people for the actions of one or two. You know, back when Ottawa happened, when we had Ottawa back in 2022, you had, I believe, 1 or 2 people carrying around the F Trudeau flag along with the Canadian flag, along with another flag, a Yahtzee flag. 1 or 2 people doing this, and the entire group of people that were standing up for their basic rights were called Yahtzees. They were labeled. They were put in this group. The entire Trudeau came out and blamed the entire movement were a bunch of Yahtzees trying to circumvent the rules. Everything came down, and then we see something like this happen, and suddenly the entire cabinet is full of Yahtzees. And what's interesting is that Germany did this. My grandfather and my grandmother on my mother's side are both German Jews. They came here with their parents between World War I and World War II. My grandfather went over there and fought against the Yahtzees in World War II, while my grandmother stayed home and took care of the babies until he came back. It's so easy to blame an entire group of people for your problems.
Yeah. Oh, we're in America. Yeah.
We're in America. That's right.
That's all we do. That's all we got here.
But it's amazing, after Ottawa, after everybody stood up and said, how dare you blame a group of people for the actions of 1 or 2 people doing something very, very stupid. And not only that, but propaganda. So give me just a second. I got something I want to share with you. And this is something that I hit the wrong button. This is something that, let's see here. Here it is. This is something that was shown around. This is Bernie Farber saying, taken by a friend in Ottawa at the occupation in plain sight. It's oh my God, how can they share this? How can they do this? When 2 weeks before that, the same picture was used in Miami Beach. And said, if you got any of these were spread out through a residential neighborhood. If you got any of these, please call this number. Please report this. And then they use this as some kind of proof that this is what is going on in Ottawa. These are the exact same photos. They just copy and pasted the photos. There was no checking. There was no verifying. I do not know whether this was malicious or not. But they clearly grabbed something and ran with it without checking to see if it was authentic or not, or they used it maliciously to try and condemn a group of people, which is exactly what the Nazis did in World War II. They blamed a group of people for their problems.
If we want to talk about who is a dictatorial state at this point, we're sitting here having a conversation where we are afraid to use words invented by the Allies in a conversation about history.
Yes.
So who exactly is the dictatorial regime here? But I did make a note when you brought that up, because one thing I have been been looking at increasingly concerned is, first of all, people, they no longer question what they see and what they hear in the media. And the Germans, they started with their little false flags. I've been to Gleiwitz. Lots of little false flags. The Russians have always used false flags. The Americans have used false flags. In fact, pretty much every war that started this century have started with false flag operations. And now when I see National Socialist, I can't say yes. I can't do it.
It's fine. It's fine.
Come at me, bro. Trudeau, I'm right here. I'm waiting for you. I see these guys dressed up like neo-Nazis, yelling at Jews, with their hoods, and I see these protests with 10, 20, 50 guys saying all sorts of inflammatory stuff. And I keep looking at this going like, this doesn't feel right. I don't think these people actually are self-proclaimed National Socialists or neo-Nazis.
Agreed.
I think these are people setting other people up. This is for a news story. Like, who's handing out those flyers? Maybe this is not people on the extreme right. Maybe it's people on the left who want to fuel the fire against the extreme right. Yes. You see, everyone, if you're not a racist, you're a Nazi. No matter what you've done, because it's such an easy, you just throw out these terms that are hard to defend against, because the moment you have to, it's a little bit like, when did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah,
exactly. It's defense that it's ridiculous, but its thing is it holds less and less value, because they have thrown this around against so many people for so many reasons that at this point in time you go like, well, I no longer care what you call me, because you call everybody that. So I guess we all this or that or the other. And I think there's a very inherent danger. Yes, they probably shouldn't have brought him up and give him a standing ovation. Zelensky some years ago said, actually, I have exactly what he said about this particular, after the march in, let me see, where is it? Zelensky said, where is it? It's the last time there was a march in Kiev. I'm sorry, didn't know I was going to quote Zelensky today. Right. On 28th April, the annual march that's organized locally in Kiev to celebrate the anniversary of the division's foundation. On 30 April 21, after the march was held in Kiev, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated, we categorically condemn any manifestation of propaganda of totalitarian regimes, in particular the National Socialists, any attempt to revise truth about World War II. The march was also condemned by the German and Israeli government, as can all be expected. Streets were named after the division in Ivano-Frankivsk. Oh, I was just there, which is interesting. In Lviv, there's tons of memorial plaques. Every nation have to honor those who fought for the nation, even if they fought for the other side. I mean, I don't remember a whole lot of Italians being chastised for fighting with the Germans. I don't remember any outcry against Italians being hammered because they fought on the German side for the first 3 years, right? They invaded France and other countries. They sort of, no war crimes trials going on in Italy. No one ever, where's the war crimes trials against the Russians who invaded Poland and then kept it? Ukraine did the same thing. They to a large extent took those who fought for their country and kind of forgot about the other stuff. The war crimes that they may have committed against Polish civilians, yes. Let's figure it out. Let's have an honest, if there's going to be a trial, have a trial. But let's get some documentation, and hearsay is really not good enough. I think it's now turned into politics, because now everybody can use this against each other, and now others can start putting up right-wing propaganda and vice versa. Now you have an argument that leads nowhere. But the population is looking at this instead of where they really should be looking, like why 3 historians can't have an honest conversation, use the words of the trade.
All right. So now that my guests have had a chance to talk, I'm going to grab my soapbox and buckle up because, well, oops. Now we piss YouTube off. All right. So my general feeling on it was, one, as a Canadian taxpaying citizen, I have some questions. One, I don't care if Trudeau thinks that he's gotten away with this by simply stating, "Oh, it was the Speaker of the House. He acted alone." Does that sound familiar, folks? He acted alone. Nobody knew what he was going to do. He acted alone. I call
What was it
bullshit.
about the Kennedy assassination?
I call bullshit. Nobody gets into the House of Commons without a full vet, without them checking your background, checking what you had for dinner the last 3 weeks. There's no way in hell you get into the House of Commons without a background check. I don't care. Secondly, as Tino pointed out, this was not a secret. This was not Operation Paperclip where they came over, they changed their identities, they swept it under the rug, created a whole new persona. This is not a case where this person was in hiding. This person was very out and outspoken and very much, yes, I did this, right? This is not a case where there was no prior knowledge of what this person did in the past, what organizations they belong to. It probably wouldn't have taken CSIS more than 2 seconds to figure this out. So there's no effing way in my mind this goes on without, one, the Prime Minister being let know. There's no way, I'm sorry, things do not happen on the floor unless the Conservatives decide to throw something at them that they, didn't tell them. But this is a member of the Liberal Party. There is no way in hell this was not vetted. There is no way in hell this was not approved. Because let's face it, if this had gone off and nobody had said anything, Trudeau would be out making speeches about how they honored a Ukrainian veteran with Zelensky here, and there'd be reels of them applauding him, and there'd be ad campaigns for the Liberal government on this very topic. But because it got a negative review, well, then somebody's got to take the fall. Hello, Speaker of the House, or should I say ex-Speaker of the House, who very politely took his tail, stuck it between his legs, took the dagger and stabbed it into his own chest while the Liberal government stabbed 16 into his back and allowed him to stand up there and take the blame for it. For that alone, they should be kicked out of office. But at any rate, secondly, so I do not buy this whole it was all the Speaker of the House's idea. He came up with this idea. He brought this guy in. He didn't tell anybody that this guy was in the audience. Bullshit. Because otherwise they wouldn't have got the camera view of him beforehand. Sorry. Secondly, I do not believe that he acted alone. I don't care what they tell me. I don't believe it. I'm sorry, you don't get into the House of Commons without a proper vetting. It's just not going to happen. And if you can, then we really need to take a look at that shit, because what the fuck? And thirdly, I'm very cautious with the way that our government is progressing. Number one, they immediately went to a fall guy. I'm sorry, that sounds like certain governments that we are told are bad and evil and need to go. Immediately, there's a fall guy. Immediately, they washed their hands of this man and said, bye-bye, thanks for your service. And then they did a wonderful appointment of the new Speaker of the House. And if you know, you know. Well, let's not piss everybody off in one stream. But they appoint the new Speaker of the House to a thunderous meh. And so now we understand that the way the Liberal government works is if if it goes off without a hitch, you're applauded. If it goes without a hitch, you're the fall guy. Trudeau knew. I don't care what anybody says. Trudeau was aware, or at least his office was aware this was going to happen. The way the cameras were situated, the way everything worked, there is no way that this was just done spontaneously. That the Speaker of the House all of a sudden went, you know what? I know this gentleman and he fought in Ukraine and I'm going to have him brought into the House of Commons and I'm not going to tell anybody why. Number one, the list of people that are allowed in the House of Commons when a foreign dignitary is in the fucking House of Commons is going to be short and few. So I call bullshit. Absolute bullshit.
So I have a little more information about him if you want.
Sure.
So he immigrated to Canada in 1951 after having lived in England first. His unit was not implicated in any Holocaust or operations against the Jewish population. His unit got there after that had been over, but the Polish civilians are one thing. So he wrote. That's interesting. So he got a good job working in the aircraft industry. He retired. He has two sons. His two sons, they started a Ukrainian Research Endowment Fund for the University of Alberta to advance academic studies into the underground Ukrainian Catholic Church. Alberta University have just announced they're going to close that down and give them the money back, which now presumably will hurt whoever's studying that field. But okay. So now we're punishing the son's endowment work for alleged crimes of their father. That's, yeah. So he contributed to, he wrote a blog for the Association of the SS Galicia in 2010, 11, 12. And he protested loudly about the invasion of Russia. He got a medal. In 27, the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress awarded him and several others the SS Galician Medal of Merit for his work in the Galician militaries in the community for their unit. So yeah, certainly he wasn't exactly hiding here anywhere. Unfortunately, I have to not entirely share your sentiment that they knew. Yeah, I think they knew that he did something. The problem is the people we have in government in the West now are outright idiots. They're not particularly well educated. They don't know anything about anything. They know nothing about history. I could unfortunately see, not in Germany or Israel, but anywhere else in the West, things like this slipping through the cracks simply because people are now too stupid to know who was this unit. Oh, he fought the Russians. Oh, yeah, we'll bring him in and thank him. And no one flagged it because probably no one, I don't know if Trudeau, he's like the Biden administration hiring complete outright idiots, or the German government these days, no one with a degree. I could see people simply just being too dumb to know or understand that this may just offend people, which it then did. If no one, and probably mostly in the Jewish community in Canada, had complained, I could even see this just blow over. But they did complain because rightfully so. I could see people just being too dumb to actually know.
See, I think that the problem that I have with it, with this, is we've always known our leaders are not always the brightest. Both Canada and the United States. We've had a few winners. Hello, Bush. So we've had a few winners. But the solace you always had was it wasn't the leader. It was the people he had behind him.
Yeah.
Because, was Bush an absolute idiot most of the time? Yes. But he had Cheney, and he had a few other people behind him that made sure that everything was copacetic and that he stayed in line for the most part, right? We always had the guiding hand from the people behind, making
Some,
sure
some
that
intelligent civil servant would stand behind him. A
yes,
Humphrey somewhere would say, no, this will not be good.
yes, yes. Whereas in the modern day, as Tino just rightly pointed out, that is becoming less and less. Now, unfortunately, the invisible hand and guiding hand is just as stupid as the person they're guiding.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's the real problem.
so the issue for me is I find it hard to believe with the amount of information we have at our fingertips. A simple Google search, a simple "Hey Siri," it's with the amount of information we have at our fingertips. We're as not individually, but as a group at large, the dumbest generation there is. We have the
Yeah.
most information and we are the most uninformed that we've ever had. And I don't
Yeah.
care. I'll take that battle any day of the week.
Look what I was bringing up earlier. Uh, the Germans blamed an entire population for their problems. They believe that whether they went along with it, whether they just were like, okay, we're just going to sit back and do nothing, whatever, however you want to look at it, an entire population got blamed because of their religion for a country's problems. Look at what Canada just did in 2022 in Ottawa. They blamed an entire group of people for the actions of one or two guys for their problems. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. Yeah. When you boil down to it, when you get to the root of what is going on, it's the exact same thing. Yeah. Is we're going to blame an entire group of people for the actions of one or two people and say this is where all of our problems come and we have to deal with it. Even if we have to deal with it violently, we're going to send out the shock troops and we're going to deal with it. Yeah. It's the exact same problem.
Yeah.
We have learned nothing.
Just to be a cheeky bastard, I'll put in the background my picture of me standing at the trucker convoy that Loki is speaking of. But anyway, when they rolled through Winnipeg, just to be a cheeky
be careful you don't get euthanized.
So the I completely agree with you on that point. And to further do that, I saw this wonderful thing with a certain disease called COVID that was out a little while ago and still there apparently. There was this one moment I wish I could give you the people that were involved, but I can't remember now. I think it was one of my times I was up at 2 a.m. scrolling through things, and it just made me smile because there was a panel and they were talking about how they don't understand how an entire country could be indoctrinated like the Germans were in World War II, indoctrinated to believe these horrible things and do horrible things to their neighbor. They couldn't understand. And the guy on the far left of the panel turned to them and went, "You mean like we are now with COVID?" Yeah. And the whole room went quiet. Yeah. It's just funny to me.
I mean, you have people gluing themselves to the street because they think cars and cows are killing the planet. I mean,
the planet is fine. The clusters are dying. As a great comedian once said, the planet is fine. The planet will shake us off like a bad case of fleas. It's us that are fucked. Hello, George Carlin. May you rest in peace. But oh god, now you got me talking George Carlin. Good lord. But for me, I think we have found just how troubling things are in this country, and for the most part, I never thought Canada, of all countries, would get this bad. No offense to my American guests and people in chat. I could see the United States.
We're trailing. We're coming.
But I couldn't. I just, for the life of me, even though we had Mr. Jean Chrétien for about 2,000 years as prime minister, I couldn't see us slipping that far. And
I mean, even with the prime minister you had during World War II, who was complete lunatic, nut job, he would have been better.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
Our politician choices have not always been the greatest. Hello, Harper. We are sitting in a world right now where the Canadian government, and this is an entirely different topic, so I'll briefly touch this, are pushing through a censor act. It's no different. You can call it whatever the fuck you want, Trudeau. It's a censor act, and shut up. You can call it whatever the hell you want, because here's the thing: politicians and people know if it doesn't affect that group of people, they don't care.
True.
So what they do, because this bill and legislation that they're pushing through right now only affects podcasts and streams that make 10 million a year. So the average person goes, well, that doesn't include me. I don't give a shit. Here's the problem. That's how they get it started.
Yeah.
That's how they get it in the door.
I mean, once you start censorship, there's no going back. And the people are not fighting back against this. It's terrible. I see it in England, the sale, Ofcom. It's going after Mike Stern, and the censorship is what they need on a global level in order to control conversation, dialogue, and information. And that's also a way of saying we are going to start doing things you will not agree with, but we don't want your dissent and complaining. They already control the press and the media. So where are people going to hear and meet and realize that they're not alone in not agreeing? So they have to shut down that venue of conversation. So I guess it's always nice to see when they make a faux pas like this one. And after all, I mean, this was a victimless crime. Only a politician got fired. We all like that, but sorry. I just like it when politicians get fired or mugged because of their own crime laws. But anyway, we're not going in a healthy direction. We're really not. And I don't really know how we're going to turn this around, because the template of the Third Reich or the Stasi or communist countries, dictatorships, is laughing us in the face, because we are paddling down that road just with more technology.
Well, and if you need, and I was talking to Tino about this the other day, if you need a hint at how far down this stupid path we've gone, is when you have people with degrees, as much as that paper probably doesn't mean worth a damn that it's printed on, but with degrees that cannot tell you a difference between communism and National Socialism. When they say they're the same, when they say, oh, well, they're one and the same. No, they're not. In my opinion, Tino can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I think the interesting thing when you come to the, just to insert, that if the difference of National Socialism and communism is not that different for the people living under its yoke.
Yes.
It's the same dictatorship for the people on the bottom. The people on the top, well, they'll always have the rights that they want, and that's where you're separating the world's population out. The rich will get richer, and they'll be in power of their new world domination, which you call that global communism, neo-Marxism, fascism, National Socialism. A dictatorship is a dictatorship, no matter what wrapping you stick it in. But if you say, well, we want one dictatorship instead of, we don't want this evil National Socialism, we'll go for communism instead. It's much better, and they just haven't been done right.
That hurts my head too.
I seek alcohol when I hear that, right?
You mentioned degree. You know what? One of the things you have to do to get a degree in the United States is you have to take this funny class called environmental science. One of the things they teach you Tino knows. One of the things they teach you in environmental science is you have to reduce the population by at least 1/3. How do you think that's going to happen? And that is what they teach you. You are going to you have to figure out a way to reduce the population by 1/3 on the planet. That was our final anyway.
Only 1/3?
Yeah, 1/3. But that was in 2022, 2023.
Yes, I think the World Economic Forum is up to like having us down to 1 billion total. I think that's by 6/7.
2003, 2004. So that was 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, now they're up to.
They've gotten bigger aspirations.
They talk about 1 billion on the planet. It's good. That means we need to eliminate 6 billion. I mean, even Himmler would have thought that's a bit optimistic.
Who do you think those 1 million people are going to be?
Soros and his family, Klaus Schwab and his family. I'm sorry. I thought it was an actual question. Bill Gates and his family. I don't know.
Oh, there's a few on that list.
There better be some pretty girls in there. Otherwise, I'm not going to fight to get on that train.
Yeah, that's the problem, and unfortunately, have you seen that sides? Anyway, I'm just saying, nuttier than a nut factory comes to mind. The issue, the other issue I wanted to talk about when it comes to this is we look at this and we go, well, that was a fuck up. It's going to cost them, but we move on. We have to stop moving on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As the underlings under the yoke, we've got to stop moving on. We've also got to stop with this mentality. If it doesn't affect me, it don't care. Because here's the thing.
We're inbred in circuses, dude. We are inbred in circuses. We are living bred in circuses. That's where we are at. TikTok, movies, entertainment. Yeah. It's a constant issue of bread and circuses because everybody's tired. No one wants to dick around with it. We're working our butts off. We're barely making it, or we're making it okay, but just enough okay, or whatever it is. We it's almost like we don't have time to deal with the BS that everything's thrown at us. So as long as it, like you said, as long as it doesn't affect us, why are we going to be bothered with it?
But the factual problem is, and I saw an interesting analogy on this, and being a well-famous, super highly intellectual historian, my go-to is watching Simpsons to relax. And there was a good one where, yes, I'm a Simpsons fan, go with it. The Autobots were fighting in their backyard, and Maude went out and said, "Why are you fighting?" Marge, sorry. Why are you fighting? And they looked at each other like, "We really don't know." I'm like, "Thank you so much, housewife, for making us see we shouldn't fight each other. We should unite and use all our forces to take over Earth." They are deliberately making us fight each other while they're sitting on their high mountain, sipping their little champagne, flying their private jets, while we're fighting each other on racial grounds, green grounds, all this nonsense. They are dividing us over. And all the people on the ground, we are the ones paying. We are the ones who will come for each other when they call, when they force the division or the civil war or what they have. Instead of us actually, we're so busy trying to explain to these green lunatics not to glue themselves to the freeway, or talking to our racial colleagues that, no, we're really not racist. We're really not racist. No, we're really not. Instead of this, we should stop fighting each other and turn on them, because they are the ones who are destroying the Western civilized world to the point where they're actually making Putin look like the sane one in the room. We are destroying our nations, our governments, our countries, our schools across the board. We're flooding it with crime, with criminals, with immigrants, Europe, America, Canada, everywhere. Insane laws that basically are all forced to divide us so we can't get a foothold and look at what they're actually doing. That is the biggest danger and the biggest insanity. They're smart. They're dividing us. Was it Washington? No, it was not. Was it Lincoln that said a house divided unto itself cannot stand? That's what they want. They want this chaos, destruction, self-destruction, because they know they will have what they need in order to rise from the ashes and then control what's left after everything is destroyed. They want our destruction. They say so. It's not propaganda. It's not gossip. They say so themselves. Listen to what Schwab is saying. Listen to what Gates are saying. Listen to their damn speeches. They're stating what they want to do. If that shouldn't terrify us, but it doesn't, because we're too busy arguing with our neighbor about some non-existent problem. So that's where we are.
You know, and that brings me back to a conversation as Loki had brought up the convoy that we had here in Canada that kind of sparked a whole bunch of them. But the last time Canadians, the truckers, which is the one group you don't screw with, stood up and went F this and went to Ottawa. When they were there, you know, you had people online going, arrest them, just arrest them, tow their trucks, do this, do that. Make it, and when the laws were passed and put into place that they could freeze bank accounts, that they could do this, they could do that, they could do this, and these idiots, these sheep were like, yes, 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 do it, do it, do it.
Yes.
Not realizing once that law's in place, how long before it's used against you?
They don't care.
How long before it's not a trucker rally? It's not a convoy. It's an Aboriginal group out in Ottawa protesting about not having clean water in their reserve, and the government goes, well, all your bank accounts are now frozen and we're going to arrest the lot of you. Have fun. And then when they go, wait, this is unjust. How dare you do this to us? The truckers look at them and go, hi, remember when you were calling for this shit? Have fun with it. And
they don't think that's ever going to happen. That's the problem. Oh, they never do that to me.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm protected. They never do that to me.
Yeah, it would never happen to me. It's the dumbest freaking mentality there is.
You can spy on my phone. I don't say anything wrong. I've got nothing to hide. That's how it starts.
Yeah, exactly. And now with this, we look at it, and it happened. There was outrage. And then the fall guy took the fall. And it's next, moved on.
Yeah.
It's almost not even talked about for the most part. There's still little rumblings here, little rumblings there. We should be... And this is, I promise I won't get too political too much, but it's got to be said. We should be, and as a Canadian, I can say this, we just had an election. They're expensive, but I'm sorry. Jetmin Singh, you want votes? Grow a set and diffuse Parliament and force an election. But I forget, you don't want to do that, because you know the Conservatives are getting in next election. So if you call it, you lose power. So grow a set, Jedmeg Singh, and I'm butchering his name, and I apologize for that. But he's the leader of the ND party. He's the only thing keeping Trudeau in power. If he came out tomorrow and said, I have no confidence in this prime minister, it would dissolve Parliament. And we'd be forced into another election early. But he doesn't have the balls.
Curious about Canadian politics. At some point in time, Klaus Schwab came out and said that he had half of the Canadian Parliament on his side, in his pocket, so to speak. And somebody in the Canadian House stood up and said, well, I would like to know who these people specifically are, before his microphone was cut off. Did anything ever come of that? Because I would, on your behalf, like to know.
They got swept under the rug.
And
they moved on with new. They moved on with new and wonderful talking points, because that's basically all it is now.
Isn't this?
When I grew up, we had something called debates. We don't have those anymore. We have talking points, and if you stray too far from those talking points, the person you're talking to is going to look at you like a deer in the headlights right before the truck hits it, because they were only prepared with talking points.
I mean, and if people ask you, they start asking intelligent questions, you can always just call them a racist or a national socialist, and that'll end the conversation, right? That's the subterfuge.
Yes.
Same thing here.
The talking points, the
Yeah.
buzzwords and talking points. That's what our debates have come down to, is
I mean,
buzzwords and talking points.
I remember we had demonstrations down here. I work out right across from the Google building, and there are then protests against free speech here a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And I saw some of the Google employees participate in the demonstration, then swept their key card and went into the building. So I know they worked there. When we have demonstrations against free speech, I can only see that as a very serious brainwashing, indoctrination of people. Because if that is something people can get behind, we really have bigger problems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy, because something like this, I sit back and I look at this and I'm like, if this would have happened, and now I'm going to sound like the old man sitting on the front porch, but if something like this would have happened in the 90s, I mean, a president getting a blowjob damn near brought down the American government at one point.
Yeah.
This is much worse, right? This is, whether the unit did anything wrong or not, the very fact that you would open that wound intentionally because you thought you could get away with it. Let's be honest. The people who did it probably thought they could get away with it. Oh, we might get a little bit of flack, but it'll be okay.
I'm going to go as far as to say that if president gets a blowjob in the Oval Office on a daily basis and keep himself balanced and calm, as long as he's doing a good job, I don't care. If you, obviously, I don't want the Clintons back. I would like them behind bars. I'm sure Bill would like Hillary behind bars and out of his bedroom.
Doesn't she keep
no
behind
sympathies?
bars? I mean, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that.
But and if what happened in Canada, I'm at this point. It's like if there's been a normal world, somebody would have figured out who did this, and if it was up to Trudeau to say, you know what, this was a really stupid thing to do, didn't research that thoroughly, I'm sorry. That in my world could have been the end of it if it was because we were pursuing something more important to do. It's like, right, you know what, I messed up, sorry, won't happen again. Moving on to something important. I'm seeing that because we have politics is now so divisive. I'm assuming it is in Canada as well. We just lost our speaker, which we probably should have booted him 6 months ago when he screwed up on his promises. I'm at this point where we're using division to not do anything that needs to be done. Any division. Now we're just going to talk about this for a month. Okay, I'm kind of with Trudeau in power for you guys. I'm kind of hoping that nothing gets done because anything that he's doing is bad. Same thing as with the American government. Anything they do is bad for America. So please do nothing. Shut down the government. Go home. Go on vacation. Whatever. I don't care. At this point, I expect anything coming out of our governments will be bad. So any distraction that'll stop them from doing anything is probably better for the people of the various countries. But I would like us to actually get back to a sense of governance where the distractions could be put aside and we could start doing something that would be best for the people of these various countries. I know it's a novel idea, really.
Yeah, I mean,
what's my point again?
Yeah. But with Canada, it's crazy because I look back and I'm like, we have had governments dissolve for less. Like with the American politics, it's very hard. It's a very long process to force another American election, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Here in Canada, it's not that hard, especially in the position that Trudeau is in. Trudeau is only prime minister because the NDP are backing him. It's the only reason he's prime minister. If the NDP do not support the government, then the government falls, which forces another election immediately within 90 days. That's the turnaround. Once the House is dissolved, it's 90 days till the election.
I would say go for it. I mean,
But unfortunately, the situation we're in right now is the Conservatives are growing in popularity, obviously, because they have somebody who can talk, which is nice. Do I agree with all of his policies? No. But he can talk, which is the worst enemy for Trudeau. I mean, mind you, Trudeau still can talk better than Biden, but you know, Biden tries.
I mean, well, that's too easy. Go on.
Yeah. So, if this had been the governments that I grew up with, we'd be facing an election in 3 months. Without question, we'd be facing an election in 3 months. Or at least the government would have had to come out and apologize, and they would have taken ownership, or even if it was the Speaker of the House's idea, you're the Prime Minister. It kind of comes under when you're a supervisor in a company or you're in a management role. If the job doesn't get done, it's your ass that gets chewed out, not the guy who twiddled his thumbs for 3 days. That's your job to give him shit. But the higher ups give you shit because it was your responsibility to make sure the job got fucking done. It's the same thing with the politics. It's the same thing with the Prime Minister. It was under his watch. Therefore, he shares the blame. Whether he knew about it, whether he participated in it or not, is irrelevant. It was under his watch.
I mean, this is where I'm a little ambivalent about it, because on one hand, like I said, we saw all the stuff they put Trump through that was all complete lies. And now we're doing the same thing to Biden because of what he actually did. The tit for tat in politics is now just so disruptive that nothing really gets done. If one side can take any excuse to get rid of the other side or win political points, they will. And I'm only seeing this entrenching political sides more and more to the point where they just will not work across the board with each other, which is also a detriment to the people. In an ideal world, you would fire all of them, send them all home, and start from the very scratch with electing completely new people in honest elections. I don't know where this is going to go. If it could be worked in a way to get Trudeau out of office, I'm all in favor of that, obviously, because I think he is a detriment to Canada and to your freedoms, and he will be a nightmare, and his laws will be absolutely nightmarish into East German dictatorship all the way. So to save Canada, any excuse that can be used to get the job done, yes. If I look at what this actually was, I can't help but just to go, that was stupid. Apologize for it and move on. This is where
I share that, and I think, like I said in the open, do I believe that this was the right thing to do? No. Do I agree that this was a good thing to do? No. However, I think what we're missing is the context, because we're not looking any deeper than what the headline said. We're just not. And as a civilization, that doesn't bode well.
There are two. Go on.
Because we're in a spot right now where 90% of the headlines are fake.
Yes.
They're clickbait. They're bullshit. And if all you do is read the headline, well, then as far as you're concerned, you should be wearing tinfoil hats and get ready for your alien overlords. But at any rate, although I'm kind of wondering if that might be better.
That goes both ways, though. That goes for both sides of the equation. Yeah. It's not just, a left or right issue. That's everybody.
No, that's everybody. It's not a left and right issue. And that's the other problem we have, is we're too entrenched. We're thinking we're back in 1914, and we have the Western Front, and on one side is your liberals. We'll just throw. We've got more than that, but we'll throw the liberals on one side, and on the Western Front you got the conservatives, and they're just in a stalemate. And if the sniper can peg off one of the other guys, well, then awesome. That's a celebration for the day. But there's no movement.
I mean, two things that should come of this in a normal world is for the Canadian Parliament, the Canadian politicians should take a look at how are things actually done. Have we filled all our positions with people that are completely brain dead, that this could actually get to this point where nobody knew or checked or understood the ramifications? And then try to figure out how do we get intelligent people in the various positions, including the civil servants, to actually start making intelligent choices. On one hand. On the other hand, the byproduct could be how do we talk about the Second World War and who did what and what, and can we actually break down the word National Socialist and who did what and why, and instead of just blanket blame everybody for everything. That should be the byproduct. But those are the two things that actually should happen, is some conversations about higher leadership, employees, civil servants, and the intelligence of who works doing what. That won't happen, either one of those, but...
Well, what I find the most troubling is after this happened, there was a major outcry, get rid of Trudeau. That died off in about 2 days. The one that stuck was deport a 98-year-old man to Poland to face the trial. That's what stuck.
Yeah.
That blows my ever-loving effing mind. That's the talking point that stuck.
Now, I also have to remember the Poles have a nationalist government right now, and they are facing elections. So it behooves them and their political agenda to ramp up the rhetoric. Let's get this guy on trial, and he killed our citizens, and that there's also that motivation from the Poles to open that door. And I mean, it would be interesting for posterity that we actually figure out who did what. Did they do this? There are no more eyewitnesses. So let's have a history. I think we need to start revising the way we talk about the Second World War and who did what and why and how, by actually having honest conversations about it. I don't think at this point in time we need to put 98-year-old dudes in prison. I don't think that actually is anything other than symbolic. They don't have that long to live. But let them tell their story. Let's start getting the historical records straight, and let's get all the records and files. Maybe we need to have, instead of having lawyers, let's having historians have a conversation about taking sides. I would like to retry the Nuremberg trials with all information that's available. Mind you, that the American lawyers were seen to burn German files in the forests outside Berlin, in the tens of thousands of files and paperwork, because they didn't support the case they were trying to make. So we have an enormous gap in our knowledge and understanding of what took place during the Second World War, and especially in the East, because so many files are missing, have been destroyed, or have only come up or come to light since the Nuremberg trials. So I think that is for the historical community to actually start setting straight. And there was millions of Germans who signed up to fight, or didn't have a choice but to fight, because they generally saw Russia as the threat. And we also need to start looking into, well, Russia invaded Poland. Hello, they killed 30,000 Polish soldiers and officers. Hello, maybe we should find out who in Russia was responsible for that, because that too is a war crime. Instead of just making it blanket, Germany are still paying for what their great-grandparents did or didn't do, because we can't actually have a conversation about that. It just is the way it is. Germany have no idea who they are. They have a messed up military, because how can you have a military when you can't have nationalism? And to me, nationalism is not a bad thing. It's just patriotism. You love your country. I love my country. I'm a nationalist. I'm a patriot. Again, rhetoric. But the Germans can't be patriotic, so how can you have a military? Germany is a complete mess because they are so afraid of what was said and done then that they can't even figure out how to buy helmets for 10 years. I don't think that's fair on the current German population, that they are paying for what their great grandparents did or didn't do. I didn't think we need to have that conversation on a broader historical basis, as opposed to just narrowing it down.
Just want to say quickly, welcome, Zax.
I made it.
Made it. Guys, I've got to go. I'm sorry,
no problem.
Canuck. I hate to jump off early, but I've got to go. Zach's always good to see you, brother.
Good to see you.
Great to see you, Tino. Great talking to you, brother. You guys have a great one.
Yeah, you take her easy, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Long day.
Yeah, I imagine. So I'll let you give your 2 cents since you're haven't had a chance yet.
Yeah, so I think that for me, I'm more of a history fan than a historian. Nothing like to your level, Tino, or you either. It's for me, what hit me first was that out of all of the people gathered there that day, we were so excited to clap for the current thing that there was no one, not a single person that I could see, except for the speaker himself, which makes me kind of feel bad for him, that caught what he was saying and thought, wait a minute, like, who fought Russia in World War II? Who was that? Whose side was Russia on at that time?
Really?
No one was like, hey, let's sit down. We should probably wait and see what's going on here. And I could not believe no one, except you could see he kind of like stopped for a second, and I think he figured it out. But everyone else was so excited to stand up and clap and cheer for a current thing that they just didn't even think about whose side Russia was on. Was Russia, like what you've already spoken to, was Russia great? No, clearly not. And then the follow-up, I thought, instead of having this guy step down, this shows me how our knowledge of history, especially in Canada, apparently is so poor that no one caught on to this. And what an opportunity this would be to educate people on the situation at that time in the Ukraine, and how multi-Ukrainians did join with the Germans because, well, it was Stalin and they hated him and he was starving them to death. Like, this is more complex than...
My enemy is my friend.
Right. And let's talk about that, because people do not know about that stuff. That is all gone. If it's not on TikTok, it's been forgotten about. And
even that's forgotten in about 5 nanoseconds. But the other thing, and to your point, I don't mean to cut you off. I'll let you talk again. But the other point I would like to bring out is we're so easy to go good side, bad side, right? In any conflict, right? We're so quick. And for me, I've always thought Americans of all people, no offense, Tino, or anybody in the chat, Americans of all people should be a little less trigger happy with that, because your country was founded as a bunch of treasonous bastards, according to the English.
Oh, we have triggers everywhere.
Right.
The British may come back.
So if you look at it from the British side, you're a bunch of treasonous bastards, and the colony got out of hand, and we said, fuck it. And then if you look at it from the American side, there are a bunch of patriotic countrymen who fought for their independence, right? So there's two sides of the same story, same coin, just different sides.
Now,
we miss that in the modern dialogue.
I will tell you, as one thing I said, I try to be a historian first, and I'll be the first one to say that the Russians killed most of my family the Second World War. So in that sense, I could still go on a rampage. I still have Russian friends. I mean, they didn't do it. I told the Ukrainian historians that I was meeting with when I was there last, I said, listen, please don't start pulling down Soviet World War II memorials. I mean, they didn't. It was a memorial, a historical memorial. It depicts an event. People died. Things happened. Battles were fought this time and place. Don't start pulling them down because you're at war with the Russians now and hate their guts now. This was different. And I was never a fan of the pulling down historical anything, because it tells a story, and once they're gone, you can rewrite history. And that's what they're doing. They're rewriting history by destroying all monuments and history of it. And what Zach was saying, I have to tell a story because that's what I do. I married a woman once who, well, she had qualities, which was all she had, but she was adamantly telling me that her grandfather was in the Marines and fought the Russians during the Second World War. That's the American education system.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's not much better in Canada. Going like,
No,
well, the
well,
Russians, whoever fought them, they weren't Nazis. They were just bad.
It was at one point. It was decent, and then we started going stupid. Which I think is the common denominator here. You know, I mean, when I went to school, there were only 2 bathrooms. Now I don't know how many there are. Anyway, moving on from that topic before I get creamed. Zach, I'll let you add some more to the conversation here.
Well, I was somewhat joking in the chat earlier, but I think as a result, instead of stepping down, they should force everyone in Parliament to play at least one game of Axis and Allies. Just one.
Yeah. There we go.
With real guns.
And they'll learn something from that. They must. You know, it could be a worse sentence. You know, well, they probably wouldn't, but it's just, it just showed me. It sort of laid bare how poorly educated or how out of touch people have become with our history, which was recent. And then you see this, you know, the man is 98 years old, and you think, well, there's very few of these men left. And when they're gone, who is going to tell their story other than the few of us, you know, who followed it? Because these were not the children of our country who didn't know what was happening. These are adults who represent our country who didn't catch any of this stuff. Well, and that's concerning.
As a proud Canadian, I'm going to say that before I say the spiel. Tino is going to laugh at this, I think. But as a proud Canadian, and I am proud to be Canadian, but I got news for people who are screaming, war crimes, lock them up. They did war crimes, lock them up. I got news for you. Half of the Geneva Convention is because a Canadian soldier did it. World War I.
And Canada did not participate in the Nuremberg war crime trials. By the way.
You know, Canada, I mean, half that Geneva Convention in World War I, Canada looked at it as a to-do list. I'm sorry, but if you go through the history of the Canadian regiments during World War I, the Geneva Convention was not something that we looked at and went, we need to follow that. No, we looked at it and went, ooh, that sounds fun. And I don't say that because I'm disparaging Canada. I'm saying it because that is our history. That is if you go back and you look, and Tino can correct me if I'm wrong, but during World War I, yeah, we looked at that as a to-do list. Our soldiers were known for straight up brutality. We did take prisoners. I didn't know we were supposed to do that. You know, that was kind of the Canadian mind thought at the time. Prisoners? Oh shit, we were supposed to take those? Oh shoot. You know, I thought my 303 round was more economical. You know, so you got to be careful, because I got news for you. Every country in the world where you may reside, if you dig far enough back, or maybe not even that far, have done some terrible, despicable stuff.
Not us. Not us. Come on.
Oh. Yeah.
I always enjoy the stories that I hear when I meet with people who are. I try to meet with as many. I travel a lot. Half the year I travel around the world and do documentaries about Second World War, First World War, Franco-Prussian War, and meet with as old people as I can find from the areas and hear their stories. And it's interesting because in France, Normandy, Denmark, I heard from quite a few that said, well, when the Germans were here, we felt safer than when the Americans showed up. In Denmark, they said, the old people said, we felt safer when the Germans were here than in the current state of given the immigration. And yeah, everybody, every warring army has committed war crimes. inadvertently, deliberately, for various reasons. And it sucks to be the ones at war and lose that war because the other side will get to point out and write the history books on that. American Civil War, the same thing. It was not just the evil Southerners. Now that's all you learn in school today is evil Southerners. The Southerners were basically National Socialists. Glorious Northerners. Yeah, no, it wasn't that black and white. Nothing is black and white, and that's we have now dumbed down people to an educational level where they, most I've studied psychology as well, and most speeches are now deliberately no longer than 3 lines because if they are, most people we want to hear politicians speak and give a speech or press or media because most people have forgotten how a sentence began if it's more than 3 lines long. So everyone talks in sound bites. No one has an actual conversation or exchange. And if you start having an exchange, it gets to be very serious because there's a lot of different variables to any historical event or any battle. And the same thing is what's in Ukraine today. You saw the very, very early on, the Russians did what they did in Bucha. That will make Ukrainian soldiers do the same things to certain Russians. And now everyone's going to do it. And if you point one thing out, then I get, well, why don't you mention this or that, this or that? And it's hard because people are people, and we behave the way people behave, but we also behave based on what is the norm of the day. World War I, it was perfectly acceptable to send 100,000 men over the top, marching towards German machine guns, losing half of them in a day. You would never see that today because, dear Lord, you wouldn't do that. World War II, carpet bombing of civilian cities became norm. You would never see that today. Things change. So when we look backwards, World War II, village after village after village were burnt down, bombed, destroyed by British Air Force, American Air Force, Russian Army, German Army, every Italian Army, every civilians were fair game. So that was just the norm of the day. Today that sounds horrible because if we were to see a war today, we would level and kill everybody in a village. I mean, you saw what's happening in some of the Ukraine battles where entire cities are being destroyed, but it's not like you're rounding up the citizens as well and shooting them, as far as I know. But we have to look back at history through the eyes of the people back then. You can't take our sensibilities today. You look at the same thing with slavery. We have to go 300 years. I mean, slavery is going on. It's thriving today. We have more slaves in the world today than we did before the American Civil War. Nobody seems to give a damn about rescuing any of them. They talk about reparations for the families of those who were enslaved until the Civil War ended. What about talking about rescuing the women and children who are enslaved today to the tune of some 4 million a year? There's a complete disconnect between how we are operating today and how we choose to use history to hammer our political opponents today or to shape our political agenda, which is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said earlier on my little political rant, and I don't know if Zach would agree or not as my fellow Canadian on the panel, but as far as I'm concerned, the NDP, the next election, should not get a vote. Like, they shouldn't even have a seat. Just for the simple fact, saying about that, just for the simple fact that how many times now has Trudeau overstepped or done something very stupid, and they've sat there and gone, we disagree with it, but we don't disagree with it enough to risk our power.
I mean, they're basically cucks, right?
Yeah, basically.
It's kind of how it comes across anyway. And yeah, the only reason they're close to power is because, they allow Trudeau to stay in power. And it would be nice if our parties were, as oppositional as possible in most areas. Like, you want to hear multiple sides and have them, debate it out, even if it's not really the core of what they believe in. So you could at least sort of get a better picture, but we don't really have that. We have a lot of monologuing, and then a lot of back and forth with just sound bites. It's like you guys had said earlier.
It's a soundbite war.
It's soundbite, and there's no conversation, and like we used to be forced to debate, and you would be given a topic that you did not believe in, and you still had to defend it. And I would much prefer a system that gives us that than what we have right now, where it's sit in the back and try to hold on to what power you have.
The other thing we've lost, and I don't mean to cut you off there,
No.
but the other thing we've lost is when I was growing up, there was a thing called agree to disagree.
Right.
We don't have that anymore. It is gone the way of the dodo. You either agree with me or else I will beat you over the head with my beliefs until you either go away or agree with me. When I was growing up, you literally had people who do not have the same views, but they were closer than family.
Yeah.
They didn't need to have the same views. They could agree to disagree and go with that.
Generally, it's a little bit like what Heydrich he said in 1943, that he who controls information controls public opinion. And whoever is in charge of the mass media will generally be the one who put people in power, because they control the information people get. If we had an honest world media who would show both sides of any given story and explore in depth without their political bias and tell people the truth about things. We still have a survey came out a couple of days ago that almost half of the American population would take the 67th booster shot. After everything we know, I don't know what media they've been watching, but it's terrifying to think that you can get sheep to lead them in that direction at this point with what we know, if we look for it. And I understand why most people, they don't have the time to look for it. At this point, they let you work 3 jobs in order to pay your gas bill. So you don't have time for more than the 10-second soundbite on you drive from one job to the next. And that's what they're banking on. But if we had an honest media, things would be very, very, very different. It would also be harder for the indoctrination in our education system if you had an honest media and honest entertainment, infotainment, that actually told a balanced view of historical events. So you can hold the press to large extent responsible here, Europe, Canada, everywhere in the West where they supposedly have a free press. You can hold them responsible for who's actually in power and for having people believe what they believe. Sadly.
I can jump on that quickly, because my other concern was I found out about this whole thing with the House of Commons through a friend of mine in Croatia that night, like the Monday night. And I had watched the news, our local news, that evening, and I didn't see this story at all. And it was in our country, and it was not discussed. And I checked back to see, and they did show it, but it was 40 minutes in, the second story after a commercial break, and then gone. And the rest of the world was talking about this, but here it was really, really kept down, and it still to an extent is. It was definitely buried. You'd think that would be a lead story, but no, it wasn't even in the first half hour of an hour-long news.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. The problem I find with this, where I find it most disturbing, is let's buy for 30 seconds that the Speaker of the House, on his own, without talking to anyone else, decided they were going to bring this person into the House of Commons. Okay. To believe that rabbit hole, do we not have then that leaves more questions than it does answers? Because for anybody with half a brain, the immediate question is, okay, how do you get permission to have somebody in the closed session of the House without giving an explanation to why they're there?
Well, especially when you're hosting a dignitary like Zelensky.
That's why I said a closed meeting of the House.
He's at war.
Yeah. So how do you get somebody invited to that table and I'm using a table as as a metaphor in this case, not invited to an actual table. But how does this person get invited to a table with no explanation? Oh, I have a thought, I have an idea, but I'll tell you later, kind of deal. And this person just gets in and is sitting 5 feet, 20 feet from Zelensky, who is a foreign dignitary, whether you like him or hate him, I don't care. Foreign dignitary who is at war at this present time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Who are all the other people on that balcony standing around this old dude? Anybody? I mean, who was all the other people who were invited then? Just
yeah,
curious.
exactly.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, precisely. And I find it odd because that's why I can't buy the official story. I can't.
No.
Because it makes no sense. I worked in security for 13 years. And I mean, for a simple graduation at the University of Winnipeg, that would not have happened. And if they vet who gets up on that stage during a graduation to speak, and now you're telling me that in our House of Commons, this is not the case? That people who are part of the House can just randomly invite Tom, Dick, and Harry for any reason they wish to join closed sessions of the House? I don't buy it.
I have a Canada question.
Sure.
Forgive my ignorance, but never really something occurred to me. But is Canada a predominant religious in one way or another, or are you just overrun by communists?
Well, that depends on who you ask.
I'm not sure you actually. I'm asking.
Yeah,
you too.
well, it depends on. See, the problem with it is, we have a very heavy. When it comes to religion in Canada, and Zax will know where I'm going with this. We have a very, very strong Catholic past that is not discussed anymore. And when it is very negatively discussed.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
So there's no one in politics who have a Catholic base or an interest in a Catholic base.
But they're not going to broadcast it.
Okay, because this old dude was he had a Catholic charity.
Well, when you have an American politician, they always have the Bible in their hand. They're very, thank God, and with God's will, I will become governor or whatever. That will not be the case up here. It'll be very downplayed.
I thought they were waving the Marxist manifesto up there, just like half of them are here.
Yeah, because of past transgressions that really have no place in this show, but Zax knows what I was referring to when I said a very heavy Catholic past. If you know, you know. So for a long time now, there has been a pull away from anything religious. Just because it opens old wounds that really have never been dealt with. They've been just put to the back burner and swept under a rug and kind of like nothing to see here. Move on.
I mean, Catholicism has its own share of problems, but that's not just in Canada. You see all over in this neo-Marxist world we live in, there's an attack on all religions because religion doesn't work well with these Marxists or the new orders. It is a neo-Marxist something world order we're looking at. They can't have other gods than theirs. That doesn't work with the communist. And I see that in Canada. I see it in Washington. You see the FBI is hanging out at churches trying to figure out. The FBI director wouldn't even respond when asked if he thought religious Catholics were terrorists. So there is a war going on against all organized religions. And wherever these social engineering Marxists take over, you will see religious destroyed. But Zelensky has a very strong Catholic country, and he has to take care of their sensibilities. So bringing in this old guy who's obviously also a Ukrainian Orthodox Catholic who has this grant at the university to study that very thing may also have played a part.
Oh,
I'd say, just throwing it out there, that it may also be that.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. There's more to this.
Yeah.
And the only reason we're not hearing it is because it backfired tremendously.
And who are the other people? I think that's interesting. Who are the other people up there? Because they may be far more interesting than this
and
particular
the person
guy.
who's been drawn attention to. Yeah. Precisely.
It's just usually
look over here and pay attention over here. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's hiding nothing. The guy was hiding nothing.
No, he's out there.
Yep.
Yeah. And for me, I just find this whole thing, it really, if it doesn't set off alarm bells in your head, then you need to take a pause. Because to me, it's if you go along with the given information that's been given to us and the line we're supposed to believe and the narrative that we're supposed to follow, it's troubling in itself, because then that tells me that nobody vets for the House of Commons, so any Joe Blow can go into the House.
Well, who's prime minister?
Well, yeah, I mean, the biggest clown of them all. The problem I have is, it just strikes me as we have come to this point where you had the liberal speaker, or not speaker of the House, but I can't remember her name, the day after, when Polyev, who's the conservative, starts going, where the hell is Trudeau? Because Trudeau, of course, wasn't in the House the next day, conveniently, right? Wasn't in the House. So he went, I'm going to call in sick today. So she's left the answer on behalf of the Liberal government. And one of her first speeches is, I would ask our conservative people on the other side of the aisle not to politicize this and don't use it against us for the love of all that's holy. Basically, is the long and the short of her speech. Please don't use this against us. And then the spin happens in a moment. There's asking, please don't use this against us, or else you are evil, terrible humans within the next breath. It's like, what the fuck? So for me, I think as Canadians coming out of this, whether you're of the camp of this should have never been allowed to stand, this should have never been allowed to happen, how dare they do this and disgrace our country, that's an adequate stance. The other stance is meh, it's a Tuesday. So there's those people who just don't care, and unfortunately there's more of them than there are of them that care. Or you're a staunch liberal and, well, I'm sorry, but my party did this, so I have to side with it. Or you're of the camp, well, he stepped down, what more do you want? Now let's move on to prosecuting a 98-year-old man. Like, what the fuck? That's the most puzzling thing that's come out of this whole thing, is we have shifted from the government fucked up to almost the spin, from what I can tell, is thankfully, the liberal government pointed this man out so that now he can be questioned properly. Whereas Tino has said he wouldn't made no bones about who he was, what he did, what groups he belonged to. He didn't he didn't sneak into the country by the pale moonlight.
No, the Polish could have requested an interview with him at any point in time since 51. They even knew where the Galician was when they were interned in Italy in the Polish sector, and they said let them go. So the way I'm looking at the Polish situation and request right now, I see that as purely politics leading up to their election. I wouldn't doubt that they would actually go through and do it. And we in America have deported an 88-year-old SS nurse not that long ago, a 94-year-old guy who they're talking about maybe he expended 5 rounds at somewhere. He was a guard at I think he was a guard at Auschwitz actually, but there's no evidence that he actually shot anybody or did anything. But no, they're still deporting these old guys. And they're deporting them for a trial instead of for a hearing as to ascertain if they did anything. And that's what I think is ask them questions, fly there and find out if there is a case against this individual person just because he was at a time and a place. You can't. Let's see some documentation. Let's see some evidence. I would like to, for the historical perspective, like to see and know who did what, of course. But let's sustain that before we just assign guilt to somebody because he belonged to a unit or a fighting unit, even as a Waffen SS unit. That's just me. It gets a little political.
Well, for me, it's like, okay, you take your corporal in the Air Force, whose job is to maintain the planes, right? Maintain the bombers. Do you then, if the bombing raid that he worked on plane 5, that plane is now involved in a bombing that kills women and children, do you then condemn the mechanic who worked on the plane?
You don't even condemn the pilot,
right?
The pilots knew they were dropping ordnance on civilians for years during the war. They knew that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, he wore the uniform, yes, but do you condemn him? He was in that unit. He was part of that division. Do you see what I'm saying? He fixed the tire on the bomber that did the bombing run. Or
I'm sure if we gave an interview to this old guy, he would tell us.
He shined the boots of the general. That was his job during. I'm not saying that was, but I'm just using that as an example.
I tell you what, I will reach out to the old guy and see if he speaks English, see if he will do an interview and actually tell us what he did, just out of the sake of curiosity, because I actually think he probably would. I am also sure there's probably a million other networks that have done the same thing, so maybe he's laying low. I don't know, but I'll give it a shot.
I have to get out of here pretty quick, but I wanted to say one thing that's fun that came from this for me was just by getting into following some rabbit holes of videos. I found out about a battle called the Battle for Castle Itter at the final days of World War II in 45 in Austria. One of the coolest battles that you can imagine. That for some reason there's no movie made about this, where the Americans and the Wehrmacht fought against the SS defending French VIPs. How a cool story.
I've been suggested to make that a couple of times, that movie. We kind of kicked it around. It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad story. It's a good story.
It's a great story. It's a uniting story, if anything.
Yeah.
And we can't have those right now. So
no, because we need division. All right. So what I'm going to do is, we've kind of rambled for 2 hours here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the table, as it were, starting with Tino. We'll give the final thoughts. We'll wrap this up. I want to thank everybody in chat, but before we get out of here, I'll let everybody have their final word, and we'll get out of here. So Tino, you start.
Haven't I said enough?
Oh, come on. You can talk for 5 hours.
Buy my book. No, I don't think I got really anything else to add to this, except it is just another, for me, stupid thing to do. It's for me, it's just another little indication that the people in charge of our governments are just dumber than they should be. They don't know, they don't understand history, and then you get run with the media who also doesn't understand history and start painting things without actually having any context or conceptual idea what happened. And this is just another blip on that screen out of so many. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of, especially of these Western governments that are less and less educated, have less and less of a clue. All these diversity hires, we're going to see more and more dysfunction in our governments. We're going to see more things fail. You're going to see more faux pas. People say stupid and do stupid things that are not going to be covered or covered up by the press. This is just another brick in that road. Things are going to keep going the wrong way until someone is going to actually ready to face some pain and turn the ship around, because we're heading for the rock and we're just scraping the bottom. And this was just part of that bottom.
All right. And Zach's, your final comments on this?
I think this can be and should be a learning opportunity, and whether or not you learn about this specifically, just if you have kids, talk to your kids. If you have neighbors and they're not going to call the police on you, talk to their kids. But you got to educate. We have to educate the youth, because the adults have forgotten stuff already. And if that means it's entertainment, that's fine too. Like, Tino has a great channel, lots of history videos on there. It's easy to consume, and I really appreciated the 2 Kievs, the 3 you just did. Like, I've never heard those 2 put together like that, the 2 battles of Kiev. So
it took me more time to figure out how to put that together and show it than it did traveling there and filming it, I tell you.
It's a fantastic look at it, and no one, like, I know very little about the current war, really, and so you put that into perspective as well. So
Thank you.
But yeah, we should be educating people with this. So now that we're talking about World War II again for 5 minutes, let's also get some information in there to our kids if you can, and adults if you have to. And that's kind of all I have to say on that. If it's entertainment, that's fine too. It doesn't have to be textbooks.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of housekeeping things. Once I have a quick coffee and a little bite to eat, I will be putting the links to Zach's channel, Loki's channel, Tino's channel in the description. I just didn't get around to it before the stream, but I will get those in the description for moving forward. I want to thank everybody that jumped in chat and voiced their thing, said what they had to say. I want to thank everybody for being civil, even though we were talking about something that could be a little, controversial or talking. But I think we should move away from topics like this being controversial, because at the end of the day, it's history. At the end of the day, it's what our grandfathers lived through. And we paint it so quickly as controversial and a no talk. You can't talk about this. You can't have an opinion other than the
mainstream,
the mainstream topic. And I got news for you. That's how they got in that mess in the first place. Ironically. So what I would say is, piggybacking onto what Zach said, teach your children. Above all else, educate people around you. Don't be afraid to have a different opinion. That seems to be such a faux pas. Oh, well, I don't agree with them, I must be wrong. No, you just have a different opinion. And read deeper into the headlines and find out what's fluff. Because I guarantee you 90% of the stuff we see on a daily basis is fluff. And there's nothing to it. There's no meat on that bone. It's just said to shock, or it's said to get a click, or we really need to filter what our children see, what we see, and we really need to take a couple of minutes to just breathe a couple of times instead of that gut reaction when you see a title or you see something. Remember that these were men and women, and they had to make a choice for them, not a choice that 40 or 100 years from now would be looked upon as a glorious thing. They had to make a choice in that moment. Think about everything you do in a day. Every choice you make, how it could be negatively looked upon in future. Or, like,
All of them.
seriously, you spent how much money on Netflix? Stuff. That's a kind of a bad example, but it's still the point. But with that, I'm going to say thank you all. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to Loki. Thank you to Zax. Thank you to Tino. And with that, I'm going to say take her easy, folks. And be good to each other, because we got a bumpy ride. Take her easy, folks.